thanks so much to Tresia and Wimala and everyone at Samita. And of course, those at Buddhist Insights. And good to see you here again, Venerable Sumano. Do you say Sumano or Sumana?
Sumano.
Sumano, okay. And for all our American friends especially, happy Halloween. And may I just say what everyone's thinking is scariest Halloween ever. And we all know that the United States has been through some dark times in recent years, and we're hoping that things might get better. That's all I can say on that, that hopefully that things will turn the corner. Okay, so today, acceptance, and talking about my favorite topic, the end of the world. And I'll briefly recap. I'd like for today to be a bit more kind of interactive. So please do. I always start out having good intentions to make things more interactive, and then I just keep talking. And so just feel free to interrupt me. I'll just briefly recap the previous weeks. On the first week, first of these sessions, we talked about life, and I proposed that as a foundation for our moral response to the challenge of climate change should lie in an affirmation of the fundamental value of life, and that our moral precepts in Buddhism, of the first precept, and our moral intuition that life lies at the root of what we think of as valuable and worthwhile in the world. And so once we accept that, once we look at things from that perspective, then we can ask some rather different kinds of moral questions, and we can reframe things. So for example, one reframing that I think is really important is when we're looking at responses to climate change, instead of thinking of our responses to climate change in terms of degrees of annihilation. Why is it that we cannot think of it? Why is it that our technology must be a force for destruction? And our only choice is, well, how much destruction? Why is that the case? Why did we develop our technology like that? That was our choice. Once we place life at the center of our moral value, then we can ask ourselves, can we develop a culture and a technology and a way of living that is going to put the value of life at the very center? And can we not live our lives such as to promote the flourishing and abundance of life? For the second workshop, I talked about love. And I pointed out that in our responses to the threats of climate change and other related issues, that we see a lot of fear, we see a lot of hate, and we've seen an amplification of these things in the public sphere, especially in the rise of extremist authoritarian governments. Let's just call them fascist. Call them what they are around the world, and it's something we also feel inside ourselves. So an increase in sense of separation, a sense of otherness, and a sense of loss in terms of being able to just connect with people on a human level. And so that sense of hate and that fear has been driving so much of the response to climate change. So can we respond in a different way? Can we respond by recognizing that what makes it worthwhile, what makes us worthwhile, and what makes our lives worthwhile is our capacity to love and to accept each other no matter what. Okay, so we just had a couple of Somebody wanted to raise a question just a second ago. I'm not sure if that's the same person who just asked a question in the sidebar. Anyway, I'll just look at the question in the sidebar just briefly before continuing. The end of the world for Buddhists would be that we all become enlightened and live with no pain ever after. Maybe. Or if that doesn't work out, that we would actually end by being completely distorted or something like that. I will come back to that, and a bit later on in the talk, I'll read you a sutta on that topic. So hopefully that will answer that question. Was there somebody else who had a question or comment at the time? I can't see right now. Okay. So for the third of the talks, I talked about joy. And here I wanted to address the fact that we... it's stressful, it's anxious, and it's very easy to fall into depression. It's easy to fall into anxiety, and that we need to accept that this is a natural thing that we will feel and that others will feel as well. That it's natural and it's normal and it's part of the process. Joy and happiness in Buddhism comes from letting go. And we can... So Zilly's having a problem with sound. I think generally it seems to be okay. So maybe a problem at your end. I'm not sure about that. If anyone else has a problem with the sound, please just let us know in the chat. Of course, Zilly can't hear me say that. Never mind. Okay, moving on. So happiness in Buddhism comes from letting go, not from holding on. And the more that we hold on to the way that things are, the more that we insist on this kind of idea of permanence, then the harder it's going to be for us to adapt and to find happiness in the future. Not to mention, and something I think I forgot to mention last week in the session, is of course one of the great sources of joy is the joy of saying, I told you so. And when the end of the world comes, then we can all just sit around and just say, well, we warned them, we said it, we told them, and that can be a solace for us in our final days, perhaps. Anyway, okay, so that was the life, love, and joy, and today talking about acceptance. Now, the Pali word for acceptance is the word khanti, and khanti is a quality for being able to live with what we cannot control. And so acceptance doesn't mean that we don't try, it doesn't mean that we give up. But it does mean that we acknowledge the fact that whatever power that we have is limited. And at the end of the day, there are 7 billion, 8 billion people in this world. And we're often told this kind of message of empowerment. We're told that we can change the world and all of these kinds of things. Well, not really, actually. We can only do a very little bit. And even the people in the, people running countries and running governments and running corporations, even they feel powerless to do anything. And it's a very kind of pervasive feeling that somehow there's nothing to be done, nothing that we can do. So from a Buddhist point of view, we don't assume that every situation can be fixed. We don't assume that there is a solution or an answer to everything. In fact, that's just arrogance. Some things, sure, there's solutions. Lots of things, there's solutions. Other things, there aren't. You just have to accept it. So what I'm going to do now, just before going on, is I'm going to read a sutta. Now, this sutta is, if you're not aware of it, this is the Seven Sons Sutta. And it's in Anguttara Nikaya, number 7.66. I'll just pop that into the chat room if anyone wants to look it up. what can I say? The Seven Suns is more horrifying than any nightmare that Hollywood's been able to dream up. Let's see what the Buddha has to say. And this relates to that question. This is what I was thinking about, the question about what the end of the world from the Buddhist point of view. So I've heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Vesali in Ambapali's wood. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, Venerable Sir. The Buddha said this: mendicants' conditions are impermanent. I should just make a very brief remark on this. The setting here is significant. The Buddha's in Vesali, which was renowned as being the wealthiest and most indulgent and decadent of the cities at the time, a place full of all of the sensual delights. And they were in the park of Ambapali, who was the courtesan who had gifted that to the Buddha. And so the teaching on impermanence in this location is a reminder that even amongst all of the sensual delights of the world, that these things will come to an end. Okay, conditions are impermanent, conditions are unstable, conditions are unreliable. This is quite enough for you to become disillusioned, dispassionate, and freed regarding all conditions. Sineru, the king of mountains, is 84,000 leagues long, 84,000 leagues wide. It sinks 84,000 leagues below the ocean and rises 84,000 leagues above it. There comes a time when, after a very long period has passed, the rain doesn't fall. For many years, many hundreds, many thousands, many hundreds of thousands of years, no rain falls. When this happens, the plants and seeds, the herbs, grass, and big trees wither away and dry up and are no more. So impermanent are conditions, so unstable, so unreliable. This is quite enough for you to become disillusioned, dispassionate, and freed regarding all conditions. There comes a time when, after a very long period has passed, a second sun appears. When this happens, the streams and pools wither away and dry up and are no more. So impermanent are conditions. So the second sun appearing in the sky is, of course, you might argue that the Buddha knew about Tatooine and the Star Wars movies. I don't know. I'm not making that particular argument, but somebody might. There comes a time when, after a very long period has passed, a third sun appears. When this happens, the great rivers, the Ganges, Yamuna, Achiravati, Sarabhu, and Mahi, wither away and dry up and are no more. So impermanent are conditions. There comes a time when, after a very long period has passed, a fourth sun appears. When this happens, the great lakes from which the rivers originate, the Inodatta, the Sihapapata, the Ratakara, Kannamunda, Kanala, Chadanta, and Mandakini, wither away and dry up and are no more. So impermanent are conditions. So those lakes are all legendary lakes in the Himalayas. There comes a time when, after a very long period has passed, a fifth sun appears. When this happens, the water in the ocean sinks by 100 leagues. It sinks by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 700 leagues. The water that remains in the ocean is only 7 palm trees deep. It's 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or even 1 palm tree deep. The water that remains in the ocean is only 7 fathoms deep, or even 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or even half a fathom deep. It's waist high, knee high, or even ankle high. It's like the time in the autumn when the rain falls heavily and the water remains here and there in the cow's hoofprints. In the same way, water in the ocean remains here and there in puddles like cow's hoofprints. When the fifth sun appears, there's not even enough water in the great ocean to wet a toe joint. So impermanent are conditions. There comes a period when, after a very long period has passed, a sixth sun appears. When this happens, this great earth and Sineru, the king of mountains, smoke and smolder and give off fumes, like when a potter's kiln is first kindled and it smokes and smolders and gives off fumes. In the same way, this great earth and Sineru, the king of mountains, smoke and smolder and give off fumes. So impermanent are conditions. There comes a time when, After a very long period has passed, a seventh sun appears. When this happens, this great earth and Sineru, the king of mountains, erupt in one burning mass of fire. As they blaze and burn, the flames are swept by the wind as far as the Brahma realm. Sineru, the king of mountains, blazes and burns, crumbling as it's overcome by the great fire. And meanwhile, mountain peaks 100 leagues high, 2, 3, 4, 500 leagues high, disintegrate as they burn. And when the great earth and Sineru, the king of mountains, blaze and burn, no soot or ash is found. It's like when ghee or oil blaze and burn, and neither ashes nor soot are found. In the same way, when the great earth and Sineru, the king of mountains, blaze and burn, no soot or ash is found. So impermanent are conditions, so unstable are conditions, so unreliable are conditions. This is quite enough for you to become disillusioned, dispassionate, and freed regarding all conditions. Mendicants, who would ever think or believe that this earth and Sineru, king of mountains, will burn and crumble and be no more, except for one who has seen the truth? So I won't go on with the discourse. That's the main part on the seven suns. So this was the Buddha's vision for the end of the world. And he saw that whether, how literally you want to take it, up to you. But the main point here is that things change and impermanence happens. And it doesn't just happen on a little scale. Impermanence isn't just, well, my thoughts are changing right now. Impermanence isn't just the uncertainty of things. Impermanence happens at a huge scale, even bigger than that. Impermanence happens the end of the whole universe, the end of the whole cosmos. And the acceptance that the Buddha brought is the acceptance to be able to face that, even that degree of impermanence, to be able to look to the future and to say, this is the world that we're living in, and yet still to live. And this is the trick, to look at it and to live, to look at it and to say, every year the temperatures keep going up. Every year the CO2 in the atmosphere keeps going up. Every year animals become extinct. Every year the glaciers are shrinking. The ice caps are melting. Every year these things are happening. And yet we live. We wake up every day and we get on with life. How? How do we get on with life? Who knows? It just kind of happens. I don't know. You just kind of wake up in the morning and there it is, staring you in the face. And you're like, what the hell? Not another one. Okay, well, I best just do it then, right? So you just sort of, okay, now my life, and I just better get out there and do it. What else is there to do? So this process of acceptance is something which is very, we can read about it, we can look at it in the text and so on, and we can see that, but to really know it at a deep level is something else altogether. And I think that one of the great challenges that we face with climate change is that it isn't natural. And we keep calling it climate change or climate collapse and so on, but the technical term, scientific term, is anthropogenic global warming. Human-caused global warming, AGW. That's what they call it in the scientific papers. That's the acronym, human-caused climate change, anthropogenic. That's the hard bit, because you know what that means? That means it was us. We did it. I did it, and you did it. And every time that we drove a car, we were making it worse. Every time we flew in a plane, we made it worse. Every time we bought some clothes in a shop, we made it worse. Every time we ate meat, we made it a lot worse. Every time we made these choices throughout our lives, we made it worse. I'm a monk. I don't have much. And I never have had much. And my whole life, I've never been interested in having material possessions and things like at all. Like, I don't even know why anybody is. It just seems so stupid to me. Why would you want to go shopping? It's just, what a waste of time. I don't know. And I've lived a pretty simple life, and I haven't done too many bad things. And I've tried, I've signed petitions, and I've tried to talk to people about things, and I've done what I can, but I did it. I didn't do enough. And not only did we do it, we are doing it right now. Right as we're sitting here, each one of you is breathing. And every time you breathe out, that's more CO2 in the atmosphere. And every time you breathe in, you're depleting the oxygen. You're making climate change worse right now. And when I say that, you might feel like a kind of anxiety in your belly, like, I can't even breathe now. Yes, that's what I'm saying. You can't even breathe, right? But at least if we do anapanasati, if we do some breathing meditation, you can calm it down and it's much less. At least we can do that much. Not just breathing, I mean, even using this computer, right? I mean, this is using a lot of carbon and so on. So we are part of it. And climate change is not something out there. Climate change is our flesh. Climate change is literally the chemicals and the particles in our body. We are literally participating in the cycle of anthropogenic global warming right now as we're sitting here. It's not something which is else. It's not something which is out there. It doesn't belong in the Pacific Islands or in the Himalayan glaciers or in the Arctic or with the polar bears. It belongs right here in your body and in your mind. And we did it. This is a really hard thing to accept. We did it. And to grapple with that, to grapple with the guilt of that, especially for the older generation. And I think that this is something that we as human culture, I don't think we've really faced up to this. I don't think we've really digested the consequences of what's happening. On this group now, I can see people, different age groups, some people older, some people younger. And as somebody who's relatively somewhat more advanced in age, may I just say to the younger people here, I am so, so sorry. And I just hope that you can forgive me and that you can forgive us. We didn't mean to do it. And I know that doesn't make it any better, but we were just short-sighted and we didn't think. And if we did try, we didn't try hard enough. We knew. Of course we knew. I knew in the 1980s. We tried, but it didn't do any good. In the 1980s, one of the groups I was in was an anarchist group, and one of the actions that we did was we would leaflet people information about Rupert Murdoch, warning people about the dangers of Rupert Murdoch. And for those of you who don't know, Rupert Murdoch was Australian and established a kind of media empire, toxic media empire and monopoly in Australia before getting US citizenship and setting up Fox News. And we tried to warn people, this man is dangerous. And we can see what the outcome of it is. And the outcome is manifested particularly in a generational split, and particularly in the United States, where 70 to 80% of elders are listening to Fox News and subjecting themselves to this fire hose of lies and hate, and creating this split in families. Where the kids know what they're going to be facing up to. And when we see someone like Greta Thunberg, and I see Greta Thunberg, I find her incredible and so inspiring. And, when climate denialists see her, they just see a brat who needs to get back to school. So how are we going to face up to this? There's a couple of questions, a couple of comments in the chat, and I'll come back to them in just a minute, but I just want to round out my train of thought here. Some time ago, I one of the things that I've been doing myself as part of my own coping and own sort of grappling with these issues myself is writing. And I've been writing some stories, and as usual with these things, the stories are now turned into a novella, and probably the novella will turn into a novel, and the novel will probably turn into a trilogy. But anyway, so I kind of write it, and I try to imagine myself in the future. I try to imagine what people will be like. And one of the things, because I've studied and I find mythology and storytelling very moving and a very rich source of meaning. And one of the things about mythology is that as the generations pass down, that the older gods become demons. We even find this in the Pali Canon, where the Asuras are called the Purana Deva, literally the elder gods, and they're on their way to becoming demons. And I wonder whether that will happen to us. I wonder whether in the future our children, children's children, children's children's children, what stories are they going to tell about us? How will they grapple with the fact that their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents just sat and waited and did nothing while it happened? What are they going to think of us? What stories are they going to tell? And I suspect that we will become the monsters in their stories, and that they'll tell themselves stories that make us into vampires and zombies and ghouls, and that we'll be the thing that haunts their nightmares. And the reason that you do this is because you can only perceive such evil as something which is other, something which is not human. Because if they tell stories about us as humans, then they would have to admit that they're the same. But who are we? Who are we that would let this happen? That would just sit and enjoy our comfortable lives, knowing what the future holds in store. Anyhow, let me come to a couple of questions. Bhante, yesterday, from Elizabeth. Bhante, yesterday I discovered an injured and dying fawn. Sorry, it's a bit small, text a bit small. Fawn in my yard. Really? Oh my goodness. Do you have any guidance on how to skillfully be with the grief of watching someone who's dying? I was gripped by a desire to help, driven by compassion, but also discomfort with the dying process. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that number one is what I was talking about before, is to realize that we are participating in that process. So when an injured and dying fawn comes into your yard, the life of that beautiful, innocent creature is not separate from your life, and it never has been. And the reason that it's dying is not separate from the fact that you have a nice house to live in and a road to drive your car on, and that the electricity to turn lights on when you want to. And if we hadn't built the world in the way that we have, there would be a lot more room for the fawns of the world. And so to acknowledge that this is our brother and our sister, and that we have our being with this creature. We are not something which is separate with that creature, separate from that creature. So Venerable Sumino, quoting from a YouTube viewer, says, "The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly." Did he? Did he though? Not so sure about that. Anyway, God had a few other things to say about rich men and gates, or at least Jesus did, and ordered their estate. Should I be resigned to this? No, you should not be resigned to it. You should take the castle away from the rich man and give it to the poor. That's what you should do. On the retreat, you mentioned, Michael, I can't remember which retreat what that is, but anyway, I'll just move on. You mentioned one of the interview sessions that you're intending on having back in mind writing a new book as a kind of update regarding the law of karma. You find yourself, don't think I'm really writing that book necessarily, but anyway, go on. I find myself dissatisfied with the explanations given in the suttas and longing for a better, more detailed, more credible explanations of how karma is supposed to work. Okay, so, without getting into all the details, like I think that the real the critical issue here with karma is that karma is intended as a guide to personal morality and understanding the personal consequences of one's acts, but it is not a very good model for talking about the choices that we're making as a species and as a culture, and the morality of doing things without intention that nevertheless have definite consequences. And I don't know whether whether that's a limitation in the teaching of karma itself or in the way that it's been understood and presented. And so that's something which I think is definitely needs much more serious consideration. I mentioned in one of the previous talks that I believe that our systems of moral value are inadequate to grapple with the questions that we're being faced with. And this is why I think we need to come back to imagery, to metaphor, and to story to somehow imagine what it is and what's happening. But yeah, I definitely think that a more serious consideration of these things should be done. I'm not sure if I'm going to have the time or space to do it. Like I said, I'm writing a novella, which is more fun at the moment. Anyway, it sounds like honestly, to do that book, it sounds like a lot of research, right? Like looking up a lot of references and checking all of the Chinese parallels and all of those footnotes. And I mean, look, it's fun. I enjoy doing that, but it's a lot of work. Okay, so next one. So from Olivia. Okay, very good. 1.1 question. Find this acceptance of climate change similar to the corpse or death contemplation. Right, we can't just close our eyes, we need to see it up close. And this can lead to not only acceptance, but the desire to make the most out of life. Absolutely, yeah. And I think that what I'm trying to present or trying to talk about is finding a way that we can bring this kind of contemplation in that's going to be honest and real and raw, but at the same time is not going to be too overwhelming. Yeah. Okay, I have a hard time, so Olivia goes on, I have a time talking with others about these issues. Absolutely, and it's crazy, right? That's why we have this session, so we can find some kind of connection with it. If everybody followed the 5 precepts or even just cared about each other, we wouldn't be in this mess. Yet there's no proselytizing in Buddhism, and it wouldn't help anyway. Yes, yes, true that. Yeah, yeah. So I'm not sure to what extent that's a question, but yeah, I think that's true. I think that see, the thing is, like for all of the things that I've been saying, and I know that I'm painting a fairly grim picture of the future, I'm actually somebody who's I'm actually quite optimistic about people. I think people are mostly good, and I believe, even crazy though it may sound, I even believe that humanity is slowly getting better. I really do. I just think it's not fast enough. Yeah. The question is, do we help? How do we help? Yeah, I think the number one thing is just to try to be honest, to be able to listen, and not to kind of push things on people. I don't really know. Like say in this particular environment, I mean, we did a course. We gave the course a name. People are here because they're interested in it and because they presumably have some affinity for it. When I'm teaching Dhamma more generally, I can't make those assumptions, but I still try to mention climate change in the environment. I try to bring it up at least once every time that I talk, to try to sort of keep on seeding it in as something which is part of the narrative. But I do believe that my personal experience is that most people are still really not addressing it or not thinking about it carefully at all. So we can keep on bearing witness to it, and we can hold and listen to the suffering and the anxiety of people around us. I think that's really important. If that's the number one thing, which I think is really important, and I also think that that generational problem which I was talking about before also is a really kind of under-acknowledged issue. It's you hear it like if somebody says the thing that people say, I hear a lot. People say like younger people will very care about the environment, or they'll do something about the environment, which means we'll screw it up and they'll fix it. That's what you're doing. You're essentially giving up responsibility and saying, oh, well, we'll just enjoy the benefits of raping the environment, and we'll just leave it to our children and grandchildren to just pay the costs of it. That's like literally exactly what we're doing. And that kind of split, and like I feel like, obviously as a monk, I don't have kids, right? But in a way, I'm in a role as an elder in society, and part of our role is to pass down our values in a similar way that parents will want to pass down their values to kids. And more and more I go on, the more and more I think, well, what values do I have to pass down? Why should kids, or why should younger people think that I've got anything worth saying? If we, the elder generation, can't even leave them a planet to live on, if we can't even give them air to breathe or water to drink, who are we to lecture them about what's right and wrong? Who are we to tell them about how to live? What lessons do we have to impart to them? And I mean, I think we do have lessons to impart to them. I think that the wisdom of Buddhism is as valuable as ever. And if the olds, had actually lived according to the wisdom of the Dhamma, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But from a perspective of a younger person, to ask, why should I listen to you? Yeah, you probably shouldn't. You probably shouldn't, make up your own mind, figure out your own thing. And I think that part of what we need to do is to really just pass that torch and to really empower people to make those kinds of changes and to see a role in supporting that. Yeah. Okay, so SR, Venerable Sumano, thank you for posting another message from YouTube. SR from YouTube asks, Bhante, the younger generations today were once the older generations. They were human, right? Also a good point, that contributed to the climate crisis we face today. Are they so blameless? Just trying to get out of it now. Well, we don't know, right? Because they could have been in another realm. Maybe they could have been in the Deva realm or animal realm or something like that. So who can say? But yes, it is a good point in terms of that in terms of like moral responsibility. However, there's a difference between like a karmic responsibility in one sense and like a felt responsibility, right? So even if young people were have been born in previous lives or whatever, they don't remember it. They don't feel that responsibility. So what I'm speaking to here now really is the felt responsibility of elder people, elder generations, and that need to somehow accept that there is that guilt, that yes, we didn't do enough, and to not assume a position where it's our job to lecture people and tell people about how to save the world. Yeah. So anyway, is that all I wanted to say? I think that's most of what I wanted to say. I'd really like to hear some more from people, especially people we haven't heard from so far. Many of you have been for all of these courses, or at least quite a few of them. Anyone have any feedback or reflections on what we've been going through? Kelly J wants to speak. Who's in charge of allowing people to speak? Teresa, is that you? Oh, Kelly. Yeah.
Am I allowed to speak?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay, good. I didn't know
Okay.
if everything was, if all the channels were where they needed to be or not. I just wanted to speak instead of write because it's sort of subtle, but for me, as one of the people who in the 70s, it was really clear where this was leading.
Right.
It couldn't have led anywhere else. And it was very hard to see that and to see that there wasn't a social movement that addressed deeply enough the roots of what was the matter.
Yeah.
And until I personally see Extinction Rebellion as trying to make the connections between the rich people and their castles and the amount of destruction that's been done to the environment. So to me, there's a question of, and what it'll take for each of us to see that there's something to do. It makes all the difference that there is an avenue, that there's a vehicle, that there's a path, if you will, that makes sense. So it wasn't like, for me, it wasn't like all these years of doing nothing or doing only ineffectual things, because they were the things that could be done, like the petition, the contributions, and the talking about it. But that this change that's needed is so big, not only social system, but the kind of change we work to make when we practice in ourselves, the roots of suffering. So I just wanted to say that in case it's meaningful to anybody. It's not just I'm sorry. I'm not exactly sorry, because we're all in the middle of whatever causes and conditions and do the best we can with them. And I do think it makes a big difference to have a social context that supports action, a movement.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think even to know that, there's always been people who've been on their side and on the side of the planet and on the side of life. And not a few people, right? A lot of people. Yeah.
We've been trying.
Why, Kelly, can you say, like, you've probably been doing it, you said you started in the 70s, so I started in the 80s. Why didn't it work? Why is it something that's so obvious and yet it just didn't work?
Well, I think it didn't work because we have to change everything about how we operate as a group, not just, it used to be our economy here. There's a
Right.
global, there's a system, and
Right.
and it takes a lot of letting go, is my
Yeah.
opinion. It takes a lot of willingness to really take losses and let go to make
Right.
the changes that are needed.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of us are just very up for that because the source of happiness looks to be something other than getting a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And so it was easier to see, I guess,
Yeah.
because of willingness to let go, or, you know, just seeing the suffering. Was always so clear, the suffering, how much more suffering there would be. So here we are.
Here we are, right? Indeed. Thank you for that. That's beautiful. Where are we now? So we have from. Okay, Trecia says, what does it change? But the older one's responsible, so we have to live together in the end. Well, the old ones will be dead and the young ones will still be there, bitter and angry. I think the difference is that, to me, the difference is that if we as older people can start to acknowledge that now, we need to relate to younger people in a more respectful and a more loving and a more accepting way. It's not about beating ourselves up, but it's about just acknowledging that there are these different paths, and that it's acknowledging the fact that see if that split remains, see, that split in families is a split in the mind. Yeah, the split in families is a split in the mind, and if the old people are denialists and Trump supporters and all of these things, and if young people are progressive and all of these things, which to a large extent is the case. I mean, it's not everywhere, of course, but there's a large group of people where that's the case, and that creates a split in the consciousness, which then is a source of trauma down through the years. And so healing that generational split. And we mentioned, last week, I think we mentioned about the similar issue with Nazism in Germany, that it actually just creates this kind of psychic struggle and this emotional struggle when you know that your parents or grandparents were doing that. How do you live? How do you cope with that? And to acknowledge that and to actually make it explicit is the start of being able to heal those kinds of rifts. Yeah. I don't know if anybody's been following the social media drama of the Conways. No? Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Very briefly, because this is actually playing out in public, exactly this narrative. Kellyanne Conway was one of the mouthpieces of Trump. Her husband, George, was one of the never-Trumpers, a conservative pundit who rejected Trump and was completely against him. And they were kind of constantly giving exactly the opposite positions on social media all the time. And so that was kind of amusing for a while. Then their daughter steps in, and she's 15, and she's like, she can't stand either of them, don't trust either of them. And she's progressive, and she's just completely rejecting the both of them. And then she's doing her thing on TikTok, right? It's not on Twitter. So there's this whole kind of thing. And you can see that dynamic is actually like capturing a moment where there is these splits are happening in families. And because they're happening in families, they're happening in minds. And the mind of someone like Claudia Conway, a 15-year-old girl, is being shaped through these forces. Yeah. Okay. She seems fine, by the way. Anyway, going on. Acceptance. I've learned from other venues. Sorry, I'm just seeing if there's. Oh, sorry. I'm just going on trying to read the comments in order. So Ollie from YouTube says, I think without happiness, saving any environment is pointless. Show people happiness and freedom, then people won't need to destroy the environment for the happiness. Yeah, I agree. So this is kind of what I was trying to get at with the talk yesterday last week on happiness, is that when we find the joy of letting go, we don't need to destroy the environment. And, you know, it doesn't mean, again, that we don't use things. It doesn't mean we don't have things, but we can enjoy things in moderation, and we can look to what's a helpful way of living with the environment. On acceptance, Tara says,
live streaming is on.
So Venerable Sumino posts another one from Adam. Bhante, how can we prioritize the good that needs to be done now? Must we make that shift to join the global movement led by young people like Greta Thunberg, or can we pursue our own smaller local good? Whatever you want, okay? I'm not here to tell you how to active, how to you know, be a you know, how to protest or anything like that. I would personally encourage everybody to do more and to do whatever kind of action that you can, that feels right for you and that you think is going to be effective. I don't think any of us are doing enough. And I think that we should support people to do more radical kinds of action. Personally, I think if we were to ask now, what is one thing that could be most effective in actually bringing about change, one single thing, my suggestion would be for all school children to refuse to go to school. Just don't go to school, and then just tell the parents, we're not going to go back to school until you've fixed it. That's it. Why should we study when we're not going to have a world that's going to matter in any way? And if all the kids in the world just refuse to go to school. So anyway, that's my thought. Okay. Sabrina and Christian, if we make climate change worse by simply existing, what can we do at all? Struggling with depression, it makes it sound as if it's better to cease existing, and I'm sure that's not a good solution. Yes, well, it's a very partial solution. Don't cease existing, but yeah, struggling with depression is absolutely part of it, and it's part of the path, and that's normal. And it's if you don't feel depressed and you don't feel anxious, you're in denial, and so just that's not to say to just put up with the depression. You know, you try to get out of it and try to do something about it. But it's not better to cease existing. Do something to help. Existence is, of course, always bound up with suffering, and this was phrased in the Buddhist tradition right from the beginning in environmental terms. You remember the story of the Bodhisattva who was sitting under the rose apple tree, and he saw the plow churning up the soil and turning up all of the worms in the soil, and then the birds coming down and eating all the worms, and then realizing that, you know, even that is already, you're involved with killing. And even if you're just eating rice, organically produced rice, even that, you know, the Buddha was already sensitive to the environmental consequences of that even 2,500 years ago. I think we don't realize the extent to which this awareness of the destruction of the environment has been going on for such a long time. I remember reading Dostoevsky, you know, mid-19th century, and one of the big concerns that they were raising was about the destruction of the forests in Russia. And this has been going on a long time. So do what you can now to make life better for yourself and better for others. It's much what we can do as human beings. Yes, there is a cost to our life, but there's also a benefit, and there's also something we can do that's good. And even if it's being a witness to the truth, even if it is being a presence of honesty and acceptance for others, then this is already making a big difference. So Tara says, yes, the Conways are like reality TV. That is not true. They're actually real. So is quite different. Yes. Okay, dear Bhante, sometimes it seems that there is a subtle line between actively engaging and changing unbeneficial ways of doing things and having negativity towards the unskillful ways. How can we distinguish between these two pathways? Yes, very true. And like it's hard to not get judgmental about people. You know, you see people eating kind of meat burgers and, you know, driving their cars around the place. I mean, even like for me, I remember when I did my last trip and I flew to LA, I mean, I get on the plane and I'm feeling guilty about flying to LA and from Sydney, and the guy next to me, I said, oh, you know, what are you doing? He was flying with his mates to Vegas for a week. That's it. That was the purpose of their trip. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't feel quite so bad now. Yeah. It doesn't, like, yeah, we do what we can, and we can always do more. By being an example, we will encourage others to act in that same way. There's nothing, you know, we can't force people to do things. And I can think of so many people in my life, people, you know, even in my family, people I've known my whole life, and I haven't really been able to influence them. And so, yeah, what's the chances of being able to influence someone else? You know, you have to be pretty kind of modest, you know, and even as a monk, the same thing, right? I mean, I'm a monk. What can I do, right? I mean, people listen to me. You're all here to listen to me. I teach in Sydney, listen to me. But at the same time, how much do people change? You know, how much actual effect can I have? I feel like I can have very little effect. And I'm sure that I can have some effect, but it still feels like it's a lot less than I would like to be. Okay, so Paul from YouTube asks, so we're still open to questions, live questions, if anybody wants to speak. Paul from YouTube. How's it going, Paul? I hope you're doing well. Bhante, can't we also work on our personal skills, such as homesteading and renouncing some of the global communication? I feel that renunciate path of the layperson can be the most effective. Absolutely. And the best, you know, by far the most effective thing is just to do less of everything. Yeah? Focus on the people around you, focus on doing what you can, and just consume less. Learning skills also very important. The most important skill is community building. Yeah. Okay, so any other thoughts or questions while we're here? So I guess we're probably reaching towards the end of the session now, and it's 2:00 in the morning here in Sydney, so that's fun. And I can hear the night is very quiet here in the middle of the city. It's been a funny year. So far, it's a La Nina, and it's been very cold and rainy here. It's very unusual for our weather. We are doing well as far as the COVID goes. Don't have any community transmission to speak of. We're hoping that things will be picking up and life will be coming back to normal. And I know that's not the case for all of you, depending on where you are. But for all of us, you know, we are all joined together in our humanity and in our love and in our understanding. And what we are doing here through our path is trying to come to some wisdom, and through that wisdom to acceptance and to letting go. And with these qualities, whatever happens in the future, we will be better off. And I can't say what's going to happen in the future. And as you all know, I think it's likely things are not going to be great. But who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe it will all be fine. Who knows? But what we do know is that each day we get to choose. And we get to choose how we live. And we get to choose what we do. One of the beautiful suttas is the Buddha teaching to, I think it's King Pasenadi. And that's quite a dramatic sutta about I can't remember the name of the sutta now, but it talks about the Buddha talking to the king and asks him, what would you do, king, if you saw that from the north was coming a mountain rolling across the countryside, crushing everything in its path? And if messengers came from the south and said, from the south is coming another mountain, and from the east and from the west, mountains were coming, crushing across the countryside, destroying everything in their path, and you were stuck in the middle, what would you do? And the king said, what could I do? What is there to do? I would make merit. I would do good. I would try to live well. So every day we can make that choice. You know, we are here as human beings. We are, as far as we know, the most conscious, the most sentient, the most wise creatures around. We have the capacity to reflect on ourselves, to understand the world, to think about it, to try to shape our responses to the world. And that's something that's actually quite beautiful and quite powerful. And so because we have that responsibility, then we get to ask ourselves the question, what kind of person do I want to be? Right now, we're alive. And how do we live a life worth living? How do we make our life of value? So if nothing else from this course, that I hope that you can take away some reflection about that and some thought about how it is that you can live in a way that's more vital and more real in response to the very great challenges that we're facing. If I might just give one more little story. Hopefully I haven't told this story already. Anyway, I'll tell it again. But I began the series, and I forgot to do it again today, but I should mention it again, to paying homage to the indigenous people of the Baramadugal clan of the Eora Nation, and their elders past and present, who have been the custodians of this land, and their wisdom which has guided the people to live in the land for 50,000 years. When I had a conversation with an elder from the Noongar people in Perth, Noel Nanup, the first thing that he said, and this wasn't in response to my talking about Buddhism or anything like that, And we were talking about Aboriginal philosophy, and the very, very first thing that he said was that the center of Aboriginal philosophy is impermanence. Now, I didn't say anything, right? That was just what he said. What we are about is about impermanence. And to me, that was really surprising, because as a white person, our projection is that Aboriginal culture is stable and long-lasting, and it's always been the same for thousands of years. But the essence of what they're talking about is impermanence, because that's what nature is. Nature is impermanence. And I got a really nice lesson about what that meant another time from another Aboriginal elder who told me something about the way that they educate their children. So he said that one of the things that they do in teaching their children is that every so often they'll lie to them. And so one of the things that they have to teach is, how do you live? So for example, how do you find water living in a barren landscape? Oh, thank you. So there's Paul's posted about a book there called Songlines, and mentioned about Lynn Kelly's work. Who's Lynn Kelly? Is that my friend Lynn Kelly from Brisbane, or is that another Lynn Kelly? Anyway, and he said that. So he said that what they do every so often, what they'll do is they'll tell their kids, they'll give them like a test. Okay, so there's a water hole over in those hills. You have to go and find it. And they'll tell them how to find it. They'll say, go here's this part and you'll see this bush which has these flowers, and you'll see the birds flying in this way, and you'll look on the ground and you'll see the ants crawling here, and so on. And so they learn to read the land and to understand about how to find the water. But of course, there's no water there. And they go there, and this is a harsh lesson, because you can die. Right? This is not mollycoddling your kids. You can die. And it's up to them. And they come back and say, but you've lied. There's no water there. They say, well, you should have known. You should have known the flowers on that tree were not the flowers I was talking about. That was the other tree. You should have seen that. You should have known. You should have seen that the birds were not flying from east to west. They were flying from west to east. You should have seen that. And that knowledge of impermanence and that resilience and that adaptability is the lesson that really matters. And to be able to just receive knowledge and just say, this is the truth and this is the facts, that's going to get you killed. The real knowledge that matters is being able to see. So one of the interesting things that's happened in recent years in Australia is in many ways Australia, because the white people came to Australia and killed and suppressed Aboriginal people. Okay, and in many ways Australia is a developed nation wrapped around an undeveloped nation. And among the Indigenous peoples, there's a lot of health problems, education problems, and social issues, and all of those kinds of things. But being an undeveloped nation, it also has, as most undeveloped nations do, a very high birth rate. And in the Northern Territory, it seems that within maybe a few decades or so, the Aboriginal population will outnumber the white population. And I find that's kind of interesting. And I wonder whether in the future that the Aboriginal community in Australia will live and will thrive in a way that we've not been able to, because our wisdom is based on control and based on power rather than based on listening and impermanence. Anyway, okay, everybody, if there's no more questions, I think we should probably wrap up. Thank you so much for all your attention during this period. And I just want to, just my gratitude once more to everyone at Samita and at Buddhist Insights, and to all of you for attending. I hope it hasn't been too depressing for you. Oh, well, what can I say? I try to crack some jokes every now and then. and you all have a role to play and have a part to play with the people around you and your families, your neighbors, your community, your colleagues. And you all have a wisdom and a compassion and a love that you can bring to those people. So while you might feel like you're struggling and that sometimes it can be difficult to keep up and to cope, but at least you've got the Dhamma and you've got some values and you've got some meditation. That's a lot already. So don't underestimate what you can do for others. Even though you might not see it, but that effect that you're having is still there.